Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday to you. Let me remind you of where we are, of what we're doing this week for the devotions we're sending in. We're spending our time this week looking at Colossians chapter 1, really the first half of Colossians chapter 1. So much good information there. And we spent time on Monday looking at some of the introductory material that the Apostle Paul writes to this church in the city of Colossae, combating against a false teaching that was kind of germinating in the area, this weird mixture of a bunch of pagan religions and false beliefs combined to eventually flourish into what we know of as a false teaching called Gnosticism. This is just the beginning seeds of it here in the city of Colossae. And Paul comes at them in force against this false view. And some of the basics of the false teaching of Gnosticism is that there is a body of secret knowledge, which is what Gnosticism is based on. It's Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. That there's the secret knowledge that God only gives to a super select, elite few people, and they're the only ones who are saved. Everybody else is out. So they have the secret handshake. They know all the information. They have all the knowledge of God. Everybody else is ignorant and therefore unsaved. And one, that's just a terrible view that is so anti-biblical, anti who Jesus is, but also teaching that physical matter is evil, but the spirit is good. So the body is corrupted and irredeemable. Therefore, you can sin as much as you'd like, just don't corrupt your soul. God is not the creator, they teach, because God would never create something evil like physical matter. And Jesus is not God in the flesh. He can't be, because if he's God, he would never lower himself to come to us in the flesh, because flesh is corrupted and evil. So this is really a terrible false teaching that is infecting the region that Colossae is in. It's also infecting, apparently, even into the church. So Paul combats that bad news of the false teaching with the good news of the gospel. And that's what we want to do. Our world's filled with bad news. We want to combat against that with the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, we want to be good news people, and that's what we talked about last week, the message of the cross, that we are people of hope. Our faith in Christ, our love for people spring from the hope that's stored up for us in heaven, Colossians chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. That's why we're defined by hope. But hope is defined by, driven by the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. Because Paul tells them at the end of verse 5, you've had this expectation, you've had this hope ever since you first heard the truth of the gospel. So the gospel comes to us as the Lord sends people into our lives to bring that good news of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. That then blossoms hope in us, and we become followers of Christ because the gospel does its saving work. And we now have the privilege in a bad news world to be good news people. So we talked last on Monday about the message of the cross. Let's talk for a few minutes today about its power, because that's what Paul talks about next with him in chapter 1, of the power of the cross. Let's go to verse 6. Here's what he says. This same good news, the gospel that came to you, is going out all over the world. It is bearing fruit everywhere by changing lives, just as it changed your lives from the day you first heard and understood the truth about God's wonderful grace. So just as the gospel came to them, just as it's come to us, friends, it's going out all over the world. It has the power to go out from us all the way around the globe. There is no cultural barrier that can stop God's power to save. There is no language barrier that can stop God's power to save. There is no socioeconomic barrier that can stop God's power to save. There's no ethnic barrier that can stop God's power to save. That's the power of the gospel. Here's what Paul said, Romans chapter 1, verse 16. He said, I am not ashamed of the good news about Christ. It, the gospel, is the power of God at work. saving everyone who believes. So the gospel is like this powder keg of power that saves. It can overcome absolutely anything. So not only does the gospel know no barrier, it can change any life. It is bearing fruit, Paul says in Colossians 1. It is bearing fruit everywhere by changing lives, just as it changed your lives. So that's an echo of the creation account from Genesis chapter 1. When God finished creating the world, declared everything is good, he took Adam and Eve, our first parents, and he placed them in the Garden of Eden. And his instructions to them were to multiply, to fill the earth. God desired for his image that was stamped upon humanity. He wanted his image and his dominion, his rule, to spread out over all of the earth. And Paul now picks up that image and says it's bearing fruit. He says what God wanted to have happen in the Garden of Eden is happening now by the gospel, because through it, God is spreading his image. He is spreading his dominion over all of the earth as he makes his people into new creations in Christ. He's redeeming all of that fallen creation. So there is no sin that is too powerful for God to forgive. There is no addiction that is too powerful for God to break. There is no heart that is too hard that God cannot break through. There is no life that is too far gone for God to reach. There is nothing that can stand in the way of God's saving power through the gospel. And Paul will focus on this life change in two primary channels. He'll talk about knowledge and he'll talk about power. And again, he's combating the Gnostic heresy who claim this special knowledge. And in this text, he will use a form of the Greek word gnosis 5 separate times. He does it in verse 6. He says, whenever you first heard and understood, the word understood is a form of gnosis. He does it in verse 7. You learned the good news from Epaphras. Again, that's a form of gnosis. He does it in verse 9. He does it twice in verse 9, where he says complete knowledge, and then he says wisdom and understanding. Knowledge and understanding are both forms of gnosis. He does it again in verse 10. You will grow as you learn to know God better and better. Again, he's coming right at this Gnostic false teaching by saying, listen, there is not some super secret knowledge out there that God only grants to some elite category of people. He's already given you. He's already given to us the knowledge of who he is. And he did that, friends, in the gospel. We come to know who God is. And he's now transforming you by the power of the gospel so that you can know him more and more. So there's always more of God to know. We will never exhaust the knowledge of God, even in all of eternity. When we're with him forever in heaven, we will never exhaust the greatness that is our God. He has lovingly, graciously revealed to us who he is now. And he's done that again in the saving power of the gospel. He's done that through Jesus Christ walking on the earth. And he's done that through the Bible, the revelation of himself and of his ways. That's how we come to know who God is. And friends, that knowledge is not for some super secret elite group of people. That's for all those the Lord will lead to himself. You can pick up the Bible and you can read it and come to know who the Lord is. You can look at the life of Jesus and see who the Lord is. Again, Jesus himself said in the Gospel of John, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. This is what God is like, Jesus says. So we have all of the necessary knowledge that we need to know the Lord. And as he transforms us, we come to know him more and more, better and better, Paul says. Now, with that knowledge, he now talks about the power of God to change people into the kind of people he wants them to be. Verse 11, we also pray that you will be strengthened with all his glorious power, so that you will have all the endurance and patience you need. So the Christian life is not about sitting around and reading really thick theological books. Though I'm convinced the world would be a better place and churches would be better and Christians would be far better off if they did read some theological books, thick ones, by people who are really, really smart, who've dedicated their lives to thinking about and writing about who the Lord is and what the Lord has done. I think we would do well to do all of that. But the Christian life is also about the power to live out a life that honors the Lord who saved us. It's not just about learning, it's about living. And he shows us what that looks like: endurance and patience. While that might seem like, as one scholar put it, an anticlimax of all that the Lord is doing to save and to transform, all of that leads to endurance and patience? Really? That's it? That doesn't really seem like a very exciting sort of conclusion, but this is not an anticlimax at all, because it is these twin characteristics of endurance and patience that ensure faithfulness to Christ no matter the scenario that we find ourselves in. So, endurance isn't meant to communicate that we sit idly by and we passively allow wave after wave of the pain of life to wash over us. We're a spiritual doormat. This is an active kind of endurance. One commentator put it as a conquering endurance. So it is this fortitude about us that no situation in life can defeat. That because of the power of the cross, there is no pain you cannot bear. There is no sin you cannot defeat. There is no disappointment that you cannot handle. There is no loss that you cannot endure. Why? Is it because we're super awesome? No. It's because the Lord is. Because the Lord has saved us. He has transformed us by this powder keg of the gospel, and it infuses us with the power to live faithfully before the Lord. So endurance has to do with situations. Patience has to do with people. It's a word that speaks regularly in the Bible of God's response to us, um, and therefore what our response should be to the people around us. As God is patient with us, we are to then be patient with those around us. So endurance is the fortitude that no situation can defeat. Patience is a fortitude that no person can defeat. Um, so as we're dealing with all that we're dealing with right now, um, all the challenges of life that are rolling our way, and so many who are trapped in their homes and uh, spending more time with a smaller group of people than they have in a long, 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 long time. What does the Lord want to do in us right now to ensure that we're faithful to Him during all of this? He wants to grant to us endurance to withstand all that the world would bring, all the situations that it brings. And He wants to grant to us patience as He's been patient with us, so we can be patient with those that we're now quarantined with and spending a whole lot of time with. If we want to be faithful to the Lord during this season, friends, that's how we do it. We allow the gospel to save us. We allow the gospel to transform us. Again, there's no barrier. God can step in and He can overcome absolutely anything or anyone, and that transforms us. And because we grow to know God better and better, and He infuses us with power, and all of that equals endurance and patience, and therefore we're faithful to Him. So I think we'll pick up there next week. We'll spend even some more time in Colossians 1 next week. Again, I hope this was a blessing to you. I hope it was a little encouraging to you. Spend some time reading Colossians 1. It is a great chapter of the Bible. And we love you. We miss you. And we'll see you next week for the devotions. God bless.